Hi, welcome to Tales of Dread. We have some park ranger horror stories for you tonight. So enjoy and be sure to like, share and subscribe. And watch out for what lurks beneath. When I worked in search and rescue near the Jefferson Wilderness area in Colorado, I saw some crazy things. I was asked to help when a father and son hiking together got separated. Before we found him, the son had been wandering around for about a week. He looked sick, was very thin, and was very distant. When we finally got him to lie down in the back of our truck, he wouldn't even look at us or make eye contact when we talked. Instead, he pretended we weren't there, stared into space, and didn't say a word until his father came. But the cuts on his chest and arms were what really made me wonder about the kids. They looked like something the person did to themselves, like a tool. The story is getting better. After getting this child back to his father safely, the search team started to find signs of many camps all over the area. It looked like someone had been living off the land for a long time, but people have done that in many places and we're always moving. In one place, we found human bones that looked like they had been left over from someone else's camp. There was no clothing or hair on the bones, but there were signs that they had been chewed on by human teeth. After a more thorough search of the area, we found a person who fit the descriptions of dozens of hikers and hunters. He was tall, naked, and almost half human. He was covered in dirt and grass cuts, and what looked like old blood was all over his body. Well, we got the kid back to his family safely, but it looks like he had some serious mental problems. We found this person living alone in a small cave with some tools and weapons hidden away. We weren't sure how to feel about him. He was so far gone that he couldn't even talk to us. When they brought him out of the cave, he was almost wild. He wouldn't even look at us or talk. Again, we called search and rescue to find out what to do with him. Even though we had nothing to do with it. The man needed help with his mind. They told us that this kind of situation doesn't have a specific answer. They told us to take care of ourselves until more official people came, who would have more resources. So, we all took turns watching him and trying to get him to eat, drink, or do anything else, but he wouldn't do anything. I think he was eventually evaluated for his mental health, but I don't know what happened to him after that. I think he was eating the bodies of campers somewhere out there, at least that's what I was told by the coroner because the bones matched his teeth. We don't know where he came from or how long he had been living on his own. But whatever it was and however long it had been going on, it had almost completely taken away his humanity. He had turned into a wild cannibal with the help of the government. Forest ranger was the job my uncle used to have. He always told the craziest stories back in Wyoming and at family reunions. My dad always said that he lied and made them sound scarier than they probably were. I also thought so. Until a few days ago, when they seemed more real than I ever wanted. Now that I have to deal with it, I guess telling someone about it might finally shed some light on what happened. Well, here it is. Every other weekday, my uncle would patrol the forest's edges by walking around the forest's edges. He was taking his usual path and making sure nothing was out of the ordinary. But as he was walking, he saw something odd on the floor. From far away, it looks like a cocktail sausage a few steps off the path. He didn't know why it caught his eye or how he saw it in the middle of the forest floor, but he decided to get closer to it and check it out. When he got close to the sausage, he saw that it had a nail ring on it. It was also not a sausage, for sure. It was a human finger that had just been cut off and was lying next to the path in the forest. He decided not to touch and ran back to his office as fast as he could. Soon, the police showed up, and the small path was turned into a crime scene. A DNA test was done on the finger after it was picked up. It belonged to a young woman named Katie Roth, who had been seen for about 90 days at this point. As you might expect, the last place anyone knew she was near that forest. This discovery got people excited about research again. It was clear that the finger had just been cut. Most likely, she was still in the area. With the help of nearby people, the police start a series of search and rescue missions in the forest. When they did their first sweep, they looked over the whole area around my uncle's farm, but they found nothing. They looked through the whole section of forest, but they never found any more signs of Katie. The police tried one last time by sending out a few small patrols to check the whole park for any strange behavior. They didn't find any clues about what happened to her. It was like she had disappeared from the world, leaving only her finger behind. 2 months later, even the police gave up on Katie's case. Search parties were disbanded, and Katie was suddenly forgotten by everyone in the town. Once again, her finger went astray and put out the light of hope. My uncle never forgot, even though he says that on the day he found the finger, he could have found her by walking a little further into the forest. He says he was sure he could feel her there. But he ran away because, according to him, she didn't feel quite human. It had been about 4 months since my uncle's discovery, and even he had mostly forgotten about it by now. Everyone thought this was the end of the story. It wasn't over yet, but it would be soon. As he went on another one of his daily patrols, he almost tripped over a black cardboard box that had been neatly but inconveniently put on the main path. He carefully picked it up and opened it. Inside were a neatly written letter and a photo. There was neither a letter nor a picture. Katie had written a letter and taken a picture of herself looking scared but interested. He chose to find out more about them. The letter was written to her mom and dad. It tells them to stop worrying about her. She moved and finally figured out who she was supposed to be all along. It was hard and stressful, but after a few months of hard work, she finally made it. For her change to be complete, she had to make a small physical sacrifice. She had decided to cut off her last tie to the outside world. She wore her engagement ring on that finger. In the picture, the woman who had gone missing was holding her bloody stump and smiling at the camera. She wore a very fancy cocktail dress, but several grotesque figures in bright yellow coats and hoods stood around her in the middle of the forest. Smiley face masks stood still and looked very sad. He took the box right to the police, who confirmed that both the picture and the letter were hers. The search began again. Even though they were dealing with something that could be dangerous, they didn't call the neighbors this time. At this point, I think it's redundant to say that they found nothing, just like before. The search stopped, and Katie was never seen or heard from again. My uncle used to think about her all the time. He is the kind of person who gets really mad when he doesn't know something. So this mystery always made him feel a little bit uncomfortable. I think telling us about it was also a way for them to let go, since they wouldn't have had any strings to pull or a yellow brick road to follow if they hadn't. We thought he would just have to live with the mystery, but in one of his last weeks, an old work friend came to see him. At first, they just talked about everyday things. Then, all of a sudden, he brought up Katie's case. My uncle wasn't sure if he was ready to talk about it, but his friend gave him some new ideas. Someone had found one of those smiling masks from the photo just where he had found them before. His face showed that he was happy. He started to wonder if he had made it all up. He talked to me and told me that even though he was okay with what happened, he'd be happy if I tried to find out what happened. So I guess I have to do it for my grandfather. If you've heard anything similar to what I just said, please let me know. Let's try one more time to find out what happened to Katie. Back in 1996. I worked for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. While I was working out in the Bay Area, some campers in a very remote area near Yosemite National Park reported seeing a strange animal. My team and I were asked to look into it. They said they saw something that wasn't from this world. We went to where they were and started our investigation almost as soon as we got there. That night, we set up a tent and asked the witnesses what had happened on the campsite that day. They said it all started the next morning when one of them noticed a strange smell coming from his pop-up camper. It smelled different from anything else they had ever smelled. But he didn't pay much attention to it because he thought it was coming from somewhere else nearby. But as the day went on, one of us saw movement near the tree line just outside the campsite. We all turned around and saw a big black thing walking through the woods. It looked like it was trying to find something. They said it was huge and must have been at least 89 feet tall. It has dark, matted fur all over its body. They were scared, but as it got closer, they could see that its face was also covered in hair, but the most terrifying thing about it was its eyes. I didn't know what to do because they were so bright and red. They started packing up to leave right away, but as they were doing this thing got closer. It started to move faster. They screamed and ran to their cars, which they then drove away in, leaving everything behind. From the tree line, this thing stood there and watched them. It didn't move at all, it just stood there still and looked at them. Then, all of a sudden, they remembered. They told me that they think it was a Sasquatch, Bigfoot, or whatever you want to call it. They told us that they think he keeps the forest safe, but that they are in danger because of him. After hearing their story, we thought they must have mistakenly thought it was a black bear. We were nice to them, wrote down what they said, and then searched the area carefully. We really didn't find any proof. We did, however, find two things that are important. The first one is a very big pile of poop that looked a lot like a pile of human poop. However, much bigger tests are still being done on it right now. We also thought it was interesting that there was a very large footprint about a quarter mile from the tent site, about 30 feet from the same poop pile. It was 19.5 inches in length and 9 inches in width. A huge footprint the size of a person. The hole in the ground was about 5 inches deep. The thing that made this must have been very heavy. It really made me think about what was true and what the stories were about Bigfoot and Sasquatch. As a guard, I've had my share of strange things happen to me, but one stands out. A family was camping near one of our backcountry sites, and their young daughter went missing in the middle of the night. Several hours later, we found her hiding in a small cave about a mile away from the campsite. When we asked her what happened, she was crying and scared. She told us that a monster had chased her and pulled her away. We never found out what she saw, but we know it wasn't normal. This is just one of the many stories that rangers have written down. Many of these were about kids who had seen ghosts or other supernatural things. Some children are never found, and no one knows what happened to them. One of these cases is that of Aidan Park, who went missing from Olympic National Park in Washington state on July 22, 2007. He was only 6 years old at the time and was never found. Near where Aidan went missing, people said they saw a big black creature with glowing eyes. Some people think that this thing might have been the reason he went missing. Kenneth, who was 13 when he went missing in May 1966, is another sad story. Last time anyone saw him, he was walking along a rural road in Nova Scotia. Kenneth's body was found in a wooded area near the road, but no one could figure out what killed him. Many people think that a mysterious creature called the Beast of Blood and Burrow killed Kenneth. Even so, that's just a guess, since this particular tomb is often seen in North Carolina. But these are just a few of the strange things and missing people I could tell you about. As you know, David Politis has shared many of these stories, but I have a lot of stories that he hasn't found yet, and I'd like to tell you about them. If you think your audience would like it, I think they'd be interested in hearing more of these. Please tell me, and thank you for everything you do. My family and I live in Chesterfield, Missouri. We aren't rich, but we have enough money to live well. So, basically my whole life, I've had some kind of job, so I could buy anything I wanted. My parents don't want to buy me things I need. So, mostly useless things. Last summer, I got a great job as a park ranger at the Gateway Arch National Park here in St. Louis, Missouri. It wasn't a long drive from where I lived, and I didn't have to worry about transportation. It was also the coolest, most exciting, and most interesting job I've ever had. I got to see nature, which was a lot of fun and adventure. I like working with people, and the park has a lot of visitors. A lot of people also go there. I had just started working there, so I didn't know everything about the park. I still had to learn about a lot of its parts and activities. So I started getting mostly night shifts, which didn't work for me because I wasn't a night owl, and would get cranky at night. But on the bright side, there wasn't much work to do, and the older rangers did most of it, so I could just hang out, walk, or try to figure out what was going on. I really liked a guy who worked during my shifts. So, when there wasn't much to do one night, I asked him to go for a walk with me and Daisy, his guard dog, to make sure everything was okay. He had just started his job, so it was clear that I was checking on the park. We were joking around for a while as we walked along the river, and then Daisy took off after something. I ran after her as fast as I could, and Mac ran after me when I got to the bridge. I saw her barking at nothing when I got to the bridge. To say I didn't understand, it would be an understatement to say that Daisy went crazy. Suddenly, I saw something on the other side of the bridge coming toward us. It looked like a man, but he was really tall and wore a big black coat. Daisy barked like crazy at the guy and started to chase him. When I turned around, Mac was gone, but I hadn't even noticed. When I turned around, everything happened so quickly. Daisy went to bite the guy, but before I could get to him, he was gone. She came back to me because she was just as confused as I was. We ran to the front of the park to find Mac and asked him where he went inside if he had seen the man. I also wanted to call the police because he probably shouldn't have been inside, but Max said he didn't know what I was talking about and had never seen anyone. When I was running after Daisy, he just couldn't catch up to us. So he went back, but I remember very clearly that he was right behind me and followed me onto the bridge. Soon after I quit my job, I just couldn't handle it anymore. I got the chills. I still do this every time I go to my job. I don't know what went on that night. I work at the West Coast National Park as a ranger. I've been doing this for almost 10 years. In this job, I've seen a lot of different things. But there was one crazy thing that happened to me that I never told anyone about until now. I was working both shifts in July of last year because I really needed a vacation, and it worked with my schedule so I could finally have more time off during the day. Everywhere I went, I kept seeing this man who looked very familiar to me. He always seemed to be in the same place, and after a few hours, I started to get suspicious. I thought he was after me or something. But then that didn't make sense because I showed up after him, and I started to think he might be uncomfortable or think I was following him. But in reality, he was everywhere I needed to be that day before I got there. I started to feel really scared and couldn't wait for the park to close for the night, so I'd have some rest. My trip was about to start in just 2 days. That night, we locked up the park at 11, and by midnight, almost everything was done. We were all set to waste our time. Around 2 a.m. I wanted to get some fresh air, so I went for a walk. As I was walking, I heard footsteps behind me. But every time I looked back, there was nothing there. There wasn't even any wind because it was a hot night in July. So I didn't care. I was afraid I was going crazy or something. I kept going on my walk because I didn't care. But I had only been there a few meters. I heard a deep voice ask me if I knew him from behind me. I quickly turned around, but no one was there. I remember the guy I was seeing today all of a sudden. My uncle did it. He had died a few years before I was born, so I had only seen him in pictures and videos. I will never be able to explain how scared I felt when I was alone in the dark and heard footsteps and voices. I ran back to my friends, but I didn't tell them what happened because I knew they would think I was crazy. This is something I've never told anyone before. And I'm still afraid of walking alone at night and working night shifts. The park is right on the border between New York and Canada. People come to see both the falls and the wildlife in the park, which makes it a popular tourist spot. But one ranger says it's also home to something much more dangerous. The ranger, who asked to remain anonymous, told me that he's seen and met all kinds of cryptids in the park. He said that he's seen everything from giant snakes to werewolves, and that each sighting leaves him shaken. I've worked here for a long time, and I've never seen anything like this. He told me that this park seems to be cursed. He went on to say that hikers have gone missing in the park more than once, and that their bodies are often never found. It's like they disappeared into thin air, he said. He also told me about a mysterious creature called a wendigo. He said that the person who needs to leave is a ghost who lives in the woods near Niagara Falls. He said it's a pure evil creature that eats people, and that people who see it usually go crazy from fear. I've seen it myself, he said, and it's the scariest spirit you can ever see. It has sharp teeth, eyes that burn with anger, and a body that doesn't look like a human. He went on to say that he thinks the wendigo is to blame for a lot of the missing people in the park, and that it is drawn to the fear of its victims. He said that everyone who goes into the woods is afraid. The wendigo lives off of people's fear. He said again that it looked like a tall, thin person with long fingers that looked like claws. He told me that when the wendigo is hungry, it is known to attack lost campers and hikers to get food. Even though it has been seen many times, it usually kills them and eats their bodies. In the past few years, no one has said that they actually caught footage. Going into the woods doesn't feel safe to me. The wendigo is always looking over his shoulder. As far as proof that the wendigo exists in Niagara Falls State Park, the ranger wants to stay anonymous. We still don't know the answer to that. This is the first time I've shared something about myself on the internet. So part of any errors or mistakes I might make. I might not be the best storyteller, but I think everyone should know about this event. So, to give you some background, I'm a ranger who works in one of the largest national parks in North America, which I don't want to name here. Let me tell you something. The state of California is where it is. Part of my job is that I have to stay inside for most of the year. We have a space here just for reciting rangers. It's not fancy, but it gets the job done. We can live alone or with a roommate, and I've chosen to live with Bert, whose name we'll use. My patrol partner is also my roommate, and we get along well. Since I became a ranger about 13 years ago, I haven't had anything out of the ordinary happen to me. My life had been very simple and peaceful up until last week, when this happened. We were just coming back to the cabin from our after-dinner walk, which is pretty much a tradition for us now as rangers. We don't need to walk since we're on our feet all day, but it's relaxing, so we enjoy it. At this point, it was around 2 a.m. when we got to the cabin. Dinner time for us depends a lot on what jobs we have for the day, so we never eat at the same time every day. The park was also short-staffed, which made everyone's jobs a lot harder. Anyway, Bert was a lock on the door. A person was standing next to a big oak tree, directly across from the cabin and only a few yards away. When I tried to focus on the figure, it disappeared, so I figured it was just my imagination. After all, who would be here in the middle of the night? I didn't give it another thought or tell Bert about it. A few minutes later, when I was coming back from the bathroom, I saw the figure again from my bedroom window. From the window, the tree is easy to see, and the figure was right where I'd seen it before. Again, I could only see it for a split second, but this time I got goosebumps. I thought I wasn't making it up and that someone really was out there. But it didn't make sense that someone could just disappear into thin air. So I told myself to relax and get some rest. Now. Most of the time, I sleep well. But I had trouble that night. I was tired from working all day and from the long walk we still had to take. I kept turning over and over in my bed, hoping that sleep would finally come. When I finally did fall asleep, I had a bad dream. I don't remember everything, like the beginning or the part where it gets better, but I do remember the main part. I was standing near a tree, and I could see myself and Bert going into her cabin. When I got inside, Bert and I were both dead in the middle of our room. Our faces are covered in blood, and our bodies are very messed up. Even though the room is really dark, I woke up in a cold sweat. I can see right away that a man is standing near my bedroom door. I turned on my lamp. But at this point, there was nothing. I was a little scared. I was no longer tired, but I needed to rest, so I got up and heated up some water. For some reason, tea always makes me feel sleepy. I found Bert at the dinner table drinking tea when I went into the kitchen. I asked him why he was up at 4 a.m., and he replied by asking me the same thing. We went back and forth for a while before he finally gave in and told me he had this lucid dream. I got goosebumps again. I asked him what his dream was about, and he told me all about it. It was the same dream that I had had. I couldn't believe it, and I think my face showed how scared I was when he asked me what was wrong. I didn't want to tell him what was going on, but I did. At first, he laughed, probably thinking I was making fun of him. But when I told him about the strange figure I had been seeing out of the corners of my eyes, he stopped laughing. His looks changed in a big way. It turned out that he, too, had felt like someone was following us while we were walking, but he didn't say anything because he was tired and thought he was just making it up. The same was true when we got to the cabin. He thought there was a man with a hood inside. But there was nothing there when I turned on the lights a second later. I knew something was wrong, and I was scared. Bert said we should sleep after sunrise because ghosts don't attack in the morning, which made me laugh. Even though it was a silly idea, it seemed like a good plan at the time. So I said yes. But sleep was the last thing on our minds at that point. What was the point of all this trouble? And who was watching us? Anyway, around 5 a.m., I finally felt sleepy again. Now that it was bright outside, I felt braver than I had before. Not long ago. After telling Bert a good night, I went straight to bed and slept like a baby until about 3 p.m. when Bert woke me up so we could go to work. Even though I was scared to go back to our cabin to sleep that night, nothing had happened since then. But luckily, nothing bad happened. I'm not sure what to think. I would have been able to forget about what happened if it weren't for today. While driving back to the cabin after our shift, I thought I saw the same figure in the rearview mirror again. I haven't seen it since getting home, and I haven't told Bert about it, but I'm scared, so I want my story to be on the internet. If the dream comes true, it will probably make the news, and you will all know that I'm dead. If nothing bad happens and I make it through the night, I'll let you know what happens. Until then, please keep me in your thoughts and prayers. I've been a ranger for almost 20 years, but I'll never forget what happened on October 15, 2006. I had just started working at the park a few months earlier. The strange bad day. Around August 22, 2006, some of the older, more experienced park rangers were still teaching me how to do my job. Most of the time, they were very helpful and supportive, but that morning in October, they decided to play a joke on me. My morning routine is to wake up very early, about an hour before I have to go to work. I then run a few miles before going back to the park ranger's cabin where I stayed. I would take a shower and then go eat with my other co-workers before we all went to do our jobs for the day or month. It changed from day to day based on the list of jobs. So, I got up at 5:45. Even though the sun hasn't come up yet, there was already a lot of light. At that point, I had run deep into the park's forest, so some places weren't as brightly lit as the rest of the open sky. Anyway, see you in a little while. I was deep in the woods when I heard a scuffle behind me. It sounded like someone was running with me. I slowed down and turned around, but there was no one there. I could still hear rustling and light thuds that sounded like someone was walking at the same speed as me, though. I stopped and checked to see what was making the noise. It stopped right when I got there, which I thought was strange. I called out to see if anyone was there or if they needed help, but all I heard back was my own voice. Again, I brushed it off and started running. When the rustling and banging started happening again, it started to scare me because if it were any of my co-workers, they would have made noise or come out in the open. But what scared me the most was that the thuds didn't sound like those made by people. I picked up my speed and started running faster. In the blink of an eye, I saw a huge black thing cross in front of me and jump in the opposite direction of where I thought the noise was coming from. I thought my heart might stop at any moment. I knew it was an animal, but I didn't know what kind. So, I went back to the cabin. I stopped in front of the wooden door of the cabin and bent down to catch my breath. I looked back, but I couldn't see anything, and it was even quieter than before. I decided to ask the rest. When I opened the door and went inside, a whole bucket of ice water was dumped on me, then tomato ketchup and sauces. I thought so, at least because of how it looked and smelled. I heard a lot of laughter, shook my head, and went to the bathroom to take a shower. At the time, one of my fellow rangers said he was sorry for the joke. They chose to push me around. I told him it didn't matter that much. Then he said he was sorry for whatever would happen the next day, and gave me a wink. I thought it was strange, but it was clear that they had more in mind. At night, I did my work. I was walking back along the same path I took every day. When I was younger, I saw small feathers hanging from the branches of a tree. The color was red. But the fact that they weren't from a real bird was what really got my attention. It looked more like toys or bird puppets, so it was possible that there was a child in the park. There was no reason for one to be there. Since the feathers were only there on that one day, if it wasn't a child, it had to be someone else. I followed the red feathers until they led me to a fallen log. There was a small red puppet bird with no feathers. Indeed. When I picked it up, it wasn't just red, it was fresh red blood. I fell down, and it looked around to see if anything else was there. Then I saw a small hand sticking out from the log. Around the log, there was dried, muddy blood. Immediately, I told the other rangers by radio, and they all ran to the scene. They called the police, helped push over the big log, and found a young girl covered in claw marks. We had never noticed it before, as I said, and I walked that trail every day. But that day, something was very different. The police told us that the girl had died about 20 hours ago, which scared me because that was when I saw the wild animal on my run. I told the police about it, and they looked everywhere, but they couldn't find anything, not even the girl's name. As far as I know, the case hasn't been solved yet. But none of us could figure out or explain how, if the girl had been killed that day, a heavy log could have been lifted and put over her body to try to hide it. No matter what we did, moving a big log was still a movement. We had no way of missing it. We rangers should have been able to tell right away. It scared us, and even though we never talked about it again, I know what happened. Hello. I've been listening to your podcasts for a while, and I'm tempted to tell you about something strange that happened just a few weeks ago. Even though I'm not a park ranger, I spend a lot of time outside because I teach people how to paddle and take them on tours. I'm a woman who is 40 years old. I work with people of all ages, teaching, guiding, and sometimes doing a little bit of tourism here and there. The school where I worked decided to offer short trips to historical sites as a way to entertain and educate students, consumers, and customers, as well as to bring in more people. And Chickamauga National Park is one of the places we go on day trips. For those who don't know, Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Parks are in northern Georgia and southeast Tennessee. They are well known because they protect two important battlegrounds from the American Civil War. Through its creeks, the park itself does not offer trips. There are two, and they are both on the edges of the park. But the only way to get to the waterways is to paddle from outside the park. During the war, there were also things going on in the waterways. I often tell people that the war was bloody and that there are lots of scary stories about the ghosts of dead soldiers, or apparitions. There are ghosts and other things going on there. I can't say that when you're alone there, things don't sometimes seem strange. But I usually go hiking with a group. I'm sorry for the long start, but I think it's important to explain how things work. One afternoon, a group of my co-workers and I decided to go paddling to the park. We are just people who like the outdoors and sports. So we like to go out on our own every once in a while. Just in case we got lost around dusk, we made sure we had a lot of lights and lanterns on board for safety. Even though it would only take a few hours, there was no way we would stay there until it got dark. So we start paddling our kayaks against the flow of the water. Mostly doing our own things until we get to the park area. I don't know how to explain it, but when we got close to the park, I felt a chill run down my back. When I was walking around the park, I would feel weird things, but never on the boat because there were 4 of us. I just didn't care, and we kept going. The sounds of the water were heard. But after a while, I noticed that everything on land and on our sides seemed to be very quiet. People in my country seem to think the same thing, but no one has said it out loud. Do you know this general feeling people get after spending years together? Well, we all felt like something wasn't right. After a few seconds, one of my rangers started to make a noise, and we all turned to see what she was looking at. At the edge of the water flow, this strange person was staring at us. It has long hair, so at first I thought it was a boy who didn't look like either man or woman. It looked like an animal's teeth because they were long and pointed. But what really scared me were the eyes. They were bright, shiny, greenish-orange, and scary. I could tell right away that he was smart, no matter what he was or who he was. Now, a 55-year-old man who works with me gave the signal, and we start paddling out of there. Did Turt stop to return after an hour or so? We just wanted to make sure we wouldn't run into that thing again. We turned on our flashlights and saw nothing, but that show will stay with us forever. When we saw the old green eyes, we fell. We often make fun of ghost stories because we don't believe in them, but what we saw that day is something no one will try to figure out. And that's the best way. Hello, my name isn't Kevin. It's just a nickname. Of course. I'm 32. As a ranger, I work in a park in the southern part of Argentina. Sorry for my English. Its name comes from the glaciers that are there on the Austral Andes, which are close to Chile's border. There are rules that people have to follow if they want to camp there. Some don't do it. Depending on how people act, we can solve problems ourselves or have to call the army. If someone gets lost or hurt, it's up to us or the army to go inside and help them. We spend many weeks and months outside, and I remember one event that happened a few years ago. A young woman in her late 20s was our new ranger. I had to be the one to show her around. You see, most of our jobs involve walking and parking, but we have cabins where we can rest, and we keep a few bicycles around in case we need to get somewhere without using loud cars. So, one afternoon, we heard that someone had started a small fire in the park, which is against the rules. I was sent to check on the new girl and see what was going on. She will be known as Mariana. We get in touch with the people and, at first, tell them in a nice way not to do it. We don't want any fires to start. I remember that one of the boys who was 18 or 19 looked at Mariana and felt weird, but we didn't pay attention to him. We eventually went back to our steps and did our usual things until it got dark. I remember having a weird dream where I was someone else looking at the cabin from the outside. I would walk around and try to look through the windows. I got closer to the cabin and tried to open the door, but I couldn't. Every night, we always locked it up. Some strange and creepy people just showed up, and the next day when I looked at the chain bicycles, I felt weird and told my co-workers about the dream. At the time, there were 4 of us in the cabin. When I got out to open the door, I saw fresh footprints on the ground and had an odd feeling. I went back to where people kept their bikes and saw that someone had broken the padlock with a big rock and a purple one. Mariana used the same one. I told my team about it right away, and another guy and I went to talk to the family right away. They had left, but Mariana's bike was still where they had been. There was also a daughter and a little boy in the family. They didn't seem like the kind of person who would steal things or walk around at night like a stalker. I don't know what it was, but something about the teenager and the way he acted made me think he was ugly. The parents came to her cabin in the middle of the night and took the bike. I'm not sure. But I got these stalker vibes. I didn't like that people had to listen to their guts. We went back to the park with the bike and used the radio to get in touch with the staff at the entrance to make sure the family left the park together. This is not a story about ghosts or other strange things. When you are outside, be careful. Sometimes the things that are dangerous aren't ghosts but real people. We all know that Mariana can handle herself when things go wrong. She is very good at protecting herself. But sometimes strange people just happen. Be careful when you're outside, no matter where you are or what country you're in. When I was young, my dad signed me up for the Boy Scouts youngest group. He liked being outside, and all of his jobs had something to do with being in nature. He was also in the army, where he was a soldier. After that, he was a drill sergeant, and when he got older, he worked as a park ranger. He wanted me to do what he had done. So I joined the Boy Scouts to get used to being in the wild and to learn how to take care of myself. I'll admit it. I liked those ears, and he succeeded in making me want to join the army, which was what he was going for. He died a year ago, and the last thing I did in my career was to do the same thing he did. I got a job as a ranger in Colorado's White River National Forest. This national forest is very big, and there are hundreds of rangers working on all of its sides. There are also a lot of trails and creeks that you can hike over, and the scenery is, to say the least, breathtaking. In fact, it's so beautiful that a lot of people try to spend the night there and sometimes get lost. We go there to help them. Camping isn't allowed in most places because there are dangerous animals like bears and bobcats running around. Some people, though, don't want to hear the warnings. Some of us carry a pistol with a tranquilizer in it so that if an animal attacks, we can safely try to put it to sleep. One night, I was walking through the forest to see if anyone was in places they shouldn't be when I heard a noise that sounded like someone was hitting or shaking a tree far away from me. It was an odd sound, but thieves have tried to steal wood from this spot before, so I went to see what was going on. After a few seconds, the sound stopped, but I kept walking toward where I had last heard it. After about a minute of silence, a group of black and white birds suddenly fly up into the sky and start to fly away. It looked like some other animal had scared them. I knew it was dangerous to go through these parts alone at night, but I decided to keep moving slowly forward in the hopes of figuring out what scared the birds before I got close enough to the place where they took off. I thought at first that it was a big bear. From behind, I could only see it crouching on all fours with its head pointed down. Its back was covered with long hair that was much longer than what bears usually have. I slowly reached for my tranquilizer in case the animal saw me and tried to back away quietly so as not to scare it. I was able to get some distance from it, but then the worst thing that could have happened happened. I didn't pay attention and stepped on a dry branch in the grass, which broke under my heavy boots. As soon as the branch broke, I heard the animal grunt, and I knew it knew I was there. I was ready to face a bear and put him to sleep, but what happened next was something I could never have dreamed of. The hairy thing in front of me was definitely not a typical zoo animal. It stood up from crouching and stretched out its back. It was now about 10 feet tall, and each of its arms was as long as a tree branch. The most strange thing about it was that it didn't have paws like you'd expect. It had huge hands and feet with fingers, like a big person or monkey. It looked like it was trying to smell its prey when it stuck its nose up. When I saw this thing, I was so scared that my instincts took over and my body chose to run away instead of fight. Before I knew it, I was running as fast as I could from this thing. My body was moving on its own, but my mind was trying to make sense of what I had just seen. The creature made me think of a story about a creature called Sasquatch. It looked like a monkey without a tail that had arms and legs. It was crazy everywhere, and it was getting very close to me. As soon as I realized I couldn't outrun this thing, I could feel the ground shaking with every step it took. I turned and shot a drug at it to calm it down. The dart hit it in the arm, but that wasn't enough to kill this huge animal. I started running away again, reloading the gun as I went. I shot it twice in the legs this time, and I could see that it was slowing down. At least I hit it in the chest with my last dart and kept running as fast as I could. After a minute or two, I stopped feeling like I was being followed. I could finally stop running and catch my breath. I went back to the station, where I spent the next hour reading online articles. I spent as much time as I could trying to find out as much as I could about what I saw. After an hour of scrolling and reading, I am sure that what I saw was a Sasquatch. It looked exactly like what other people had said they saw and how they had described it. I also found a blog post by a man who said he saw one in the Rio Grande National Forest, which is just a few miles south of where I was stationed at first. The next morning, I always take short walks that are as close to the station as possible when I'm in the city. Since about 10 years ago, I've been a park ranger. It's the best job I've ever had, and it's also the only one. When I was very young, I knew I wanted to be a ranger because my dad was one. It was clear that he cared about this more than just a job. He enjoyed every second. So I wanted to feel the same joy at work, where so many people spend their lives. They hate my mother very much. She is a great example of that, though. She is a teacher, but she hates every second of it. During my first year as a ranger, my father died. I knew that, in general, he was very proud of me. It's a great job. But there have been some bad and sometimes scary things that have happened. I won't tell a lie. I'm pretty strong and fit, but I'm very easy to scare. My mom is very superstitious, and I guess I got that from her. Sometimes it's just little things, like strange objects showing up in places where they don't belong or strange sounds coming from the woods. This story, on the other hand, is both strange and scary. I don't know how to explain it to anyone. This happened to me 6 years ago when I was walking alone on a hiking trail in the park where I worked. It was already late at night, and it was very quiet. The night before, there was a storm, so I went out to clear the trails before a lot of big branches and other things fell. Someone could get hurt because of them. It was my job to show campers and hikers around and take care of them. So this was part of what I did for a living. I had to make sure that everyone who came to the park was always safe. I liked doing the job because it was quiet and warm outside. After a while, I heard a very high-pitched scream coming from the woods. You have no idea how scared I was by that. It went from being totally quiet and silent to making a loud, strange noise all of a sudden. This wasn't a living thing. This was an individual. I wanted to run away as fast as I could, but I thought that maybe someone else was in danger. The sound came from a long way off, in the middle of the woods. I didn't think it was a good idea to go where the sound was coming from, but I had to find out who was screaming and why. As I got closer to where I had heard the sound, I could hear loud thumps coming from behind me. It sounded like someone very big was walking. Nothing was there when I turned around. I didn't know what was going on, but I was definitely embarrassed. It took me a few seconds to get up the nerve to keep walking toward the sound. Just as I was about to call out to the person to make sure I was walking in the right direction and to ask what was going on, I kept hearing the same high-pitched scream, as if someone were right next to me. I have never been that scared before. At that point, I was afraid for my life. That's when I decided it wasn't worth it and ran back the way I came. I ran to save myself. This was not the best idea, though, because I fell over a big branch that was lying there. It was dark, and pointing the flashlight at the ground while I ran away was not easy. I fell on my face and hit the ground, but I didn't feel any pain. My adrenaline was so high that I just jumped back up and started running again without thinking. I had to get out of there, so I couldn't even walk a little bit slower to make sure I didn't fall again. My heart sank when I was almost back at the hiking trail. I could now see the same screen right in front of me. It came from somewhere on the trail, for sure. I have no idea how that could have happened. There was no way that anyone or anything could get there faster than me. I just stopped where I was. At that point, I didn't know what to do, so I decided to slowly walk toward the trail to see if there was anything out there. Nothing was visible. And I found the courage to shine my flashlight in the direction of the trail. I was glad there was nothing there. When I raised the flashlight higher to see what was on the other side, that feeling of relief went away completely. I could see a small, skinny person standing behind a tree. I got a better look when I walked onto the trail. As soon as I pointed the light in its direction, it went out. It only happened for a few seconds, but when it came back on, it was gone. I say this because I don't know what it was, but I'm very sure that it wasn't a person. Before I quit working in that park the next week, I had never been so scared in my life. I just can't get rid of my fear. I was afraid it would keep happening. When I worked in the new park, nothing strange happened. I am still working there. I actually moved because the place I work now is too far from my home to drive to at the time. That's how scared I really was.